A major Trump donor just fled the United States on a private jet. Within 48 hours of documents linking him to Jeffrey Epstein becoming public, he was airborne and heading to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. This isn't speculation. The aircraft was tracked, the flight path was documented, and the timing tells you everything about what this person knows and what they're afraid of. From a prosecutor's perspective, flight is consciousness of guilt. When someone with the resources to fight any legal battle instead chooses to run, it means they've calculated that no amount of money, no team of lawyers, no political connections can protect them from what's coming. This donor didn't just leave, he disappeared. And the trail he left behind is now the focus of federal investigators who want to know exactly what he was running from. Let me walk you through who this person is, what the Epstein documents revealed about him, and why his flight may be the break that finally exposes the network of enablers who have escaped accountability for decades. Here's what you need to understand about the world of major political donors. When we talk about campaign contributions, most people think about ordinary citizens giving a few $100s to candidates they support. But at the highest levels, political fundraising operates in an entirely different universe. Mega donors give millions. They bundle contributions from their networks. They fund super PACs. They host fundraisers that generate tens of millions in a single evening. In exchange, they get access. They get influence. They get relationships with the most powerful people in the country. And they get protection. Because when you've given $50 million to a political party, when you've personally funded a president's campaign, when you have the private phone numbers of senators and cabinet secretaries, you exist in a bubble where normal rules don't apply. Law enforcement thinks twice before investigating you. Prosecutors consider the political implications before bringing charges. Media outlets weigh the risks of angering your powerful friends. This protection has allowed certain individuals to operate with impunity for decades, and Jeffrey Epstein understood this dynamic better than anyone. Epstein cultivated relationships with megadonors specifically because he knew they were untouchable. He knew that connecting himself to their networks made him untouchable too. And now, one of those donors has fled. Here's what the documents revealed. The latest tranche of Epstein-related materials included financial records that had never been made public before. These records came from civil litigation against Epstein's estate, where plaintiffs' attorneys have been methodically tracing the money that flowed through Epstein's operation. Among these records were wire transfers, investment documents, and partnership agreements that connected Epstein to various business associates and financial backers. One name appeared repeatedly, a name that anyone following political fundraising would immediately recognize, a name connected to some of the largest political contributions in recent American history. The documents showed multiple financial transactions between this individual and entities controlled by Epstein. Not casual investments, not arm's-length business dealings, direct transfers that suggested an ongoing financial relationship spanning years. More troubling, the documents included communications suggesting this individual had visited Epstein's properties during time periods when victims have testified abuse was occurring. And most damning of all, the documents included what appears to be a handwritten note from Epstein himself, referencing this donor by first name and discussing a situation that needed to be handled quietly. From a prosecutor's perspective, these documents don't prove criminal conduct by themselves, but they establish something almost as important. They establish a relationship that this donor has spent years hiding. When someone lies about knowing a sex trafficker, and documents prove they knew him well, prosecutors start asking what else they're lying about. Here's the timeline of what happened after the documents surfaced. The documents became public on a Thursday afternoon. By Thursday evening, journalists were already calling the donor's representatives for comment. Friday morning, the donor spokesman issued a terse statement claiming the financial records were being taken out of context and that any business dealings with Epstein were legitimate and fully documented. Friday afternoon, the spokesman stopped returning calls. Friday evening, Aviation tracking services recorded a Gulfstream G650 registered to a shell company linked to the donor departing from a private terminal in New Jersey. The flight path took the aircraft first to Canada, then to Europe, then to a small nation known for its bank secrecy laws and its refusal to extradite its residents to the United States. By Saturday morning, the donor was unreachable. His homes were empty, his offices were closed, his lawyers were issuing no-comment statements to anyone who asked. He didn't just leave, he executed a planned escape. The private jet, the shell company registration, the routing through multiple jurisdictions, the destination without extradition. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a contingency plan that had been prepared in advance, waiting to be activated the moment the exposure became undeniable. Here's what the flight tells prosecutors. When wealthy individuals flee jurisdiction, they're making a calculation. They're weighing the cost of leaving their lives behind against the cost of staying and facing what's coming. For someone with this donor's resources, the cost of fleeing is enormous. Properties abandoned, businesses disrupted, social standing destroyed, family relationships strained. The comfortable life they built over decades, gone. No one pays that price unless the alternative is worse. From a prosecutor's perspective, this flight is an admission. It says that this donor believes criminal charges are coming. It says they believe those charges are serious enough to result in significant prison time. It says they believe they cannot win in court. And it says they know things that they never want to testify about. That last point is the most significant. Wealthy defendants almost always choose to fight rather than flee. They have the best lawyers. They can drag proceedings out for years. They can often negotiate favorable outcomes. Flight suggests that fighting isn't an option, that the evidence is too strong, or that fighting would require revealing information that this donor considers even more dangerous than imprisonment. What does he know that he'd rather spend the rest of his life in exile than reveal? Here's what they're not telling you about the donor's relationship with Trump. This individual has been one of Trump's most significant financial backers. Not just campaign contributions, though those were substantial, but business relationships, investment partnerships, loans during periods when traditional banks wouldn't lend to Trump. The connection goes back decades, back to the era when Trump and Epstein were photographed together at parties, back to the time when Palm Beach and Manhattan social circles overlapped in ways that everyone involved now pretends didn't happen. The donor was part of that world. He knew both men. He did business with both men, and according to witnesses who have spoken to investigators, he was present at gatherings where Trump and Epstein socialized together. This creates a direct evidentiary chain. The donor knew Epstein. The donor knew Trump. The donor witnessed them together. And the donor has now fled rather than answer questions about what he saw. For prosecutors building a case against Trump related to Epstein, this donor is a critical witness. Or rather, he was a critical witness. His flight is obstruction in its purest form. He has removed himself from the reach of American subpoenas. He cannot be compelled to testify before a grand jury. He cannot be called as a witness at trial. Whatever he knows about Trump and Epstein is now locked inside his head, protected by thousands of miles and the sovereignty of a nation that won't send him back. Here's how investigators tracked the flight. Modern aviation is surprisingly transparent for those who know where to look. Private jets, despite their aura of secrecy, are tracked by multiple systems. ADS-B transponders broadcast aircraft positions continuously. Flight tracking websites aggregate this data and make it publicly accessible. Aviation enthusiasts and journalists monitor these systems routinely. When a high-profile story breaks, investigators and reporters immediately check whether relevant individuals are moving. Private jet activity is one of the first things they look for. In this case, multiple independent trackers identified the aircraft within hours of its departure. The tail number was cross-referenced with FAA registration databases. Shell company filings were examined. The ownership chain was traced back to entities connected to the donor. The flight path was documented in real time. The stopover in Canada, the Atlantic crossing, the European waypoint, the final destination. By the time the donor landed, journalists already knew where he was. They just couldn't reach him. This level of transparency is a relatively new phenomenon. A decade ago, this flight might have gone unnoticed. The donor might have simply disappeared, with no public record of where he went. But in 2024, everything leaves a trail. And that trail is now evidence. Here's what federal investigators are doing right now. First, they're securing every document they can find before it disappears. The donor's departure triggered emergency protocols. Investigators are seeking warrants to preserve financial records, communications, and any materials that might be destroyed by associates acting on his behalf. Second, they're interviewing everyone who might know what the donor knew: business partners, household staff, former associates, anyone who might have heard him discuss Epstein or Trump or the circumstances that led to his flight. Third, they're working with international partners. While the donor's destination country doesn't extradite, it may cooperate in other ways: evidence sharing, witness interviews, financial record access. Diplomacy is complicated, but it's not impossible. Fourth, they're following the money. When wealthy individuals flee, they typically move assets in advance. Investigators are tracing wire transfers, cryptocurrency transactions, and property transfers that occurred in the days and weeks before the flight. And fifth, they're building a case against the donor himself. Flight from prosecution is a crime. Obstruction of justice is a crime. Even if he never returns to the United States, he can be indicted, tried in absentia, and convicted. The conviction might never result in imprisonment, but it destroys any possibility of return. It freezes assets that remain in U.S. jurisdiction. It turns allies into liabilities who face their own exposure for helping him. Here's why this matters for the broader Epstein investigation. Jeffrey Epstein didn't operate alone. He had a network of enablers, participants, and protectors. Some of them have been identified and prosecuted. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. A few minor figures have faced consequences. But the major players, the billionaires and politicians and power brokers who made Epstein's operation possible, they've remained untouched. This donor's flight suggests that's about to change. When someone at this level runs, it sends a signal to everyone else in the network. It says the protection is failing. It says the documents are surfacing. It says the walls are closing in. Other individuals connected to Epstein are watching this flight very carefully. They're consulting their own lawyers. They're reviewing their own contingency plans. They're calculating their own risk exposure. Some of them may run too. Some of them may decide to cooperate instead, trading information for leniency before it's too late. From a prosecutor's perspective, this is how networks collapse. One person panics. Their panic creates pressure on everyone else. And suddenly, people who thought they'd take their secrets to the grave are racing to cut deals. The donor's flight may be the domino that starts the chain reaction. Here's the connection to Trump that cannot be ignored. Trump has spent years distancing himself from anyone connected to Epstein. Former friends become acquaintances. Business partners become strangers. Close associates become people he barely knew. But this donor complicates that narrative. The financial records, the campaign contributions, the business dealings, the social connections, all documented, all traceable. And now the donor is gone, fled to a country where he can't be subpoenaed, unavailable to answer questions about what he witnessed, what he knew, what he did. Trump should want this donor to testify. If the relationship was innocent, if there's nothing to hide, testimony would be exculpatory. It would confirm Trump's version of events. But Trump hasn't called for the donor's return. He hasn't demanded that his ally come back and clear his name. He's been silent. That silence tells you everything. From a prosecutor's perspective, when your supposed allies flee rather than testify on your behalf, it means they know testifying would hurt you. It means the truth isn't exculpatory. It means the relationship was exactly what the documents suggest. Here's the bottom line. A major Trump donor with documented financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein fled the United States within 48 hours of those documents becoming public. He traveled by private jet to a country that won't extradite him. He left behind properties, businesses, and a lifetime of accumulated wealth and status. No one does that unless they're afraid of something worse than exile. What does he know? What did he witness? What did he participate in? those questions now haunt everyone connected to the Epstein network. Because if someone with this donor's resources, this donor's connections, this donor's access to the best legal defense money can buy, if that person decided that running was the only option, what does that say about what's coming for everyone else? The flight was tracked. The destination is known. The evidence left behind is being secured. And somewhere, federal investigators are looking at the donor's relationships, his financial records, his communications, and asking who else was part of this network. The donor thought he could escape, but in escaping, he confirmed everything prosecutors suspected. Flight is consciousness of guilt, and this flight just made the case. Stay informed. Watch for more departures. Watch for more documents. Watch for the moment when running stops being an option and cooperation becomes the only path forward. Because the network is unraveling, one private jet at a time. More truth coming.